In the dry red dust of the Sahel, tragedy had just struck. Dozens of Burkina Faso soldiers had fallen in a brutal terrorist attack. The country was mourning, mothers weeping, flags at half-mast, and silence blanketing the streets. And just as the nation bowed its head to honor its dead, a letter arrived from across the ocean. It bore the seal of the United States Embassy. It was not a letter of condolence. It was not a hand of solidarity. It was a summons. The message was clear. President Ibrahim Traoré must come to Washington to explain the security situation. A leader, mid-grief, summoned like a subordinate. But this time, history would not repeat itself. Captain Traoré replied with one sentence, "If anyone feels unsafe in Burkina Faso, they are free to leave peacefully." That single line echoed like thunder across a continent long silenced. Stay with us, because this isn't just another story. It's the future our ancestors dreamed of. Subscribe and stand with us for an Africa that will never bow again. They called it an invitation. They called it diplomacy. But behind the polished phrases and diplomatic stamps, it was something else entirely. A command. Just days after the blood of Burkina Faso soldiers stained the northern desert, a letter from Washington landed in Ouagadougou. It did not bring comfort. It did not bring respect. It brought a question dressed in arrogance. Why is your country unstable? Come to us and explain yourself. In a world that pretends to have moved beyond colonialism, this was the sound of empire reminding a black nation who it believes still holds the leash. The United States expressed concern about the security situation in Burkina Faso, not because of the lives lost in the terror attack, but because of the safety of American citizens living there. It was not solidarity. It was self-interest, plain and cold. But the deeper insult lay in the delivery. Burkina Faso President Ibrahim Traoré was not asked to send a delegation. He was not offered a meeting of equals. He was told to come, to travel thousands of miles, mid-crisis, and report like a schoolboy to a headmaster. And that's when the air in Ouagadougou shifted. Traoré responded not with fury, not with speeches, but with clarity. A single sentence, no fanfare, no apology. If anyone feels unsafe in Burkina Faso, they are free to leave peacefully. That sentence cut through decades of silence. It shook the marble floors of Western diplomacy because it said what African leaders had forgotten how to say, "We owe you nothing." It was the kind of sentence that reminded people why Ibrahim Traoré Burkina Faso is not just a name in politics. He's become a symbol of defiance in a world that still treats Africa like a project, not a partner. But the response from the United States was swift and chilling. The veil dropped. No more politeness, no more protocol. In clear terms, the embassy warned, if anything, and we mean anything, happens to an American citizen, we will retaliate. Retaliate. The word echoed through the corridors of power like a loaded weapon. But what does retaliation mean when spoken by Washington? It doesn't mean emails or press releases. It means drones. It means sanctions. It means cyber sabotage. It means black ops and regime change. And they expected Traoré to tremble. He didn't. Because the message had already reached the streets. In markets, churches, radio stations, the people heard it. They saw through the mask. And they stood with their captain. They didn't cry. They didn't plead. They raised their fists and filled the streets with songs of freedom. We are not slaves. We will not bow. What began as a diplomatic note had become something greater. A test of will, of courage, of sovereignty. And Traoré passed it in silence. He refused to board a plane. He refused to beg. He stood still. And in doing so, he forced the empire to reveal itself. This is how modern colonialism works, not with chains and ships, but with envelopes and threats. And this is how nations like Burkina Faso, poor in currency, rich in courage, stand tall, even when missiles loom. Because dignity, once awakened, does not kneel again. The news moved faster than the wind. Within hours of Captain Traoré's response, it spread across Africa like wildfire. From Niamey to Bamako, from Dakar to Nairobi, people leaned into their radios, their phones, their televisions, and heard the same words. If anyone feels unsafe in Burkina Faso, they are free to leave peacefully. That one sentence became a spark. Not just in Burkina Faso, but in every corner of the continent where dignity had been long buried under treaties, loans, and aid. It was a sentence that said, "We are not your colony anymore. You do not get to summon us. In Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, the response from the people was electric. Thousands flooded the streets. Men with weathered hands waved flags. Mothers with babies on their backs sang songs of revolution. Youths, born into poverty and silence, finally had a voice, and they shouted it in unison, "We are not slaves. We will not bow." Placards rose like spears in the air. Our dignity is not for sale. Burkina Faso chooses sovereignty. Traoré speaks for all of us. It wasn't just support. It was solidarity. And not the kind manufactured for cameras or Twitter trends. This was ancestral, spiritual, born from the soil, from memory, from pain that stretches back generations. The people weren't just standing for Traoré. They were standing for something buried and now reborn, African pride. Even the army, once split by fear and influence, stood shoulder to shoulder. Soldiers who once obeyed the whispers of foreign generals now pledged allegiance to their captain. One officer was quoted saying, "Our president speaks with the voice of our fathers. Washington wants submission, but we are sons of warriors." The West had underestimated the African spirit. They thought Burkina Faso would fracture. That fear would creep into the villages, the schools, the barracks. But the opposite happened. The fear vanished. In its place, a boldness not seen in decades. For the first time in years, the streets of Burkina Faso felt like they belonged to the people. This is why the name Ibrahim Traoré Burkina Faso keeps echoing across Africa. Because he didn't just defy Washington, he awakened a sleeping continent. Radio hosts in Ghana praised him. Poets in Uganda wrote verses about him. Farmers in Guinea hung his photo beside that of Sankara. In South Africa, a youth activist declared, "When Traoré stood still, the whole world moved." And this movement wasn't born in palaces or parliaments. It rose from the markets, the classrooms, the mosques, the fields, wherever African people had long felt ignored, forgotten, silenced. Because for too long, Africa had been taught to flinch, taught that resistance leads to death, that defiance is a luxury, that obedience guarantees survival. But Traoré's answer shattered that myth. It reminded the continent that sometimes survival without dignity is not worth the price, that freedom, though dangerous, is the only road that leads to honor. And the world noticed, not just in Africa, but in the very halls of the empire. Analysts began to ask, what if others follow him? Diplomats whispered, what if this becomes a trend? Because one courageous act, done at the right moment by the right person, can ripple into something uncontainable. Traoré didn't ask to be a symbol. He became one. And the roar of his people answered back, louder than any missile, clearer than any threat. We choose freedom. We choose ourselves. We will not crawl. We will stand. To understand the weight of Traoré's refusal, we must look back, far back. Because history in Africa is not just in books. It is in blood. When the West speaks of dialogue, Africa listens for echoes. And those echoes are loudest in Libya. Muammar Gaddafi once believed he could build a United States of Africa. He spoke of a continent united by trade, security, and cultural pride, not bound by colonial borders or foreign approval. And what was his reward for such a vision? Bombs, betrayal, assassination. In 2011, they promised him dialogue. What he received instead were NATO airstrikes, a broken nation, and a legacy drowned in chaos. Libya today is not free. It is fractured, haunted, bleeding, and everyone remembers who pulled the trigger. This is why when Burkina Faso President Ibrahim Traoré received that letter from Washington, he didn't see diplomacy. He saw the shadow of history returning. He saw Sankara. Thomas Sankara, the upright man, the revolutionary, the one who renamed Upper Volta into Burkina Faso, the land of upright people. He rejected Western aid. He sold off luxury government cars. He vaccinated millions. He taught Africa to look in the mirror and love what it saw, and for that, they killed him. In 1987, with foreign fingerprints all over the conspiracy, Sankara was gunned down by his own brother in arms. The dream of a proud, self-reliant Africa buried in a shallow grave. But the seed was planted. Today, Traoré is seen by many as that seed in bloom, young, unbought, and unafraid. And like Sankara, his greatest threat is not his army, but his ideas. Because nothing terrifies empire more than a black man who says no. No to debt traps, no to foreign troops, no to dancing for aid money while his people starve. No to bowing at the feet of powers who still see Africa as a farm to be harvested. And let us be honest, the pattern is clear. When Patrice Lumumba in Congo called for unity and independence, they assassinated him. When Gaddafi in Libya challenged the petrodollar and NATO control, they invaded. When Sankara in Burkina Faso led by example instead of dependency, they ended him. So when Traoré says no, he does so knowing the risks. He does so while remembering the graves. And this is what makes his defiance even more powerful. It's not the arrogance of youth. It's the courage of memory. The memory of every African leader who dared to resist and paid the ultimate price. But Traoré has learned from them. He does not travel with fanfare. He surrounds himself not with luxury, but with loyalty. He speaks not to impress the West, but to awaken the East, the South, and the forgotten corners of his own continent. He knows the game now, and he refuses to play it. He will not walk into the trap they set for Gaddafi, smiling cameras, then silent missiles. He will not become the next Sankara, betrayed by a brother bought with promises. He will not let history repeat, because this time he is not alone. The people are watching, the youth are rising, the continent is stirring, and this is what the West fears most. Not the army of Burkina Faso, not the economy, not the weapons. They fear the resurrection of belief, the idea that Africa can govern itself, feed itself, defend itself, define itself. They fear that the lion has learned the lessons of the hyenas, because this time, when the empire sharpens its claws, it may find not a victim, but a continent no longer willing to die quietly. This resistance did not end at Burkina Faso's border. It rippled across the Sahel, across the rivers and deserts, through cities and villages, until it found its voice in other nations. Because Traoré's stance was not an isolated defiance, it was a signal, a flare shot into the African night sky. And it was seen, in Bamako, in Niamey, in Conakry. One by one, the flags of submission began to fall, and in their place, a new chant began to rise. We are not pawns. Mali, under Colonel Assimi Goïta, had already rejected French military presence. Niger soon followed, turning its back on foreign dictates. Guinea declared its sovereignty loudly. These weren't random coincidences. They were dominoes tipping after decades of tension. For too long, African countries had been treated as extensions of Western interests. Their resources mined, their leaders lectured, their people told to wait. Wait for development, wait for progress, wait for respect. But the wait is over. Young people across the continent, the majority, the future, no longer believe in that lie. They don't want aid. They want autonomy. They don't want foreign boots. They want local roots. And they don't want presidents who pose in Paris. They want leaders who walk in their dusty streets, barefoot if necessary, but proud. This is why Traoré's defiance matters. It is not about one policy or one speech. It is about permission. The silent permission that Africa always thought it needed, to rise, to resist, to roar. Traoré tore that permission slip in half, and suddenly thousands of young Africans realized, we don't need approval to be free. In the universities of Senegal, debates erupt around sovereignty. In the streets of Kinshasa, graffiti now bears phrases like, dignity first, and no more puppets. In Lagos, spoken word artists recite verses invoking Traoré's name beside that of Lumumba and Mandela. Even in countries still deeply tied to Western finance and military aid, something is shifting. Conversations once whispered are now shouted. Pride, once buried under passports and visas, is rising like dust in a dry wind. Because one brave example, one small nation led by a captain who chooses dignity over comfort, can ignite something that years of negotiation never could, and it terrifies the empire. Do you believe this new African resistance is what we needed all along? Drop your thoughts below. The headlines may speak of sanctions, expulsions, retaliations, but beneath that noise, a revolution is growing. A revolution not of guns, but of vision. It says, we will build our roads with our own hands. We will teach our children our own languages. We will defend our borders without rented soldiers. We will trade where we are respected, not where we are tolerated. We will speak with our own voice, and if our voice trembles, it will tremble with truth. It is a revolution of memory, remembering that Africa was once home to empires, mathematicians, astronomers, warriors, and poets. And it is a revolution of future, daring to dream that we can be those things again. So when Ibrahim Traoré Burkina Faso stands before the world and refuses to kneel, he is not standing alone. Behind him, unseen by Western eyes but felt in every African heart, is a continent slowly standing up beside him. 1 foot at a time, 1 voice at a time, 1 refusal at a time. Let us speak truth now. This is not a fair fight. Burkina Faso is not wealthy. It holds no permanent seat at the United Nations. It does not control global currencies or satellite arrays. It does not command fleets across oceans. Yet, despite all this, one nation, under siege from within and without, is standing up, and the world is watching. After the American threat, we will retaliate if any American is harmed. The atmosphere in Washington shifted from diplomatic to imperial. The gloves were off. No more pretense. But something unexpected happened in Burkina Faso. The people did not panic. They felt pride. At Place de la Révolution, they did not hide in fear. They marched. Old women sang war songs. Children wore red scarves. Soldiers, not trembling but firm, raised fists instead of surrender. One banner read, "Burkina Faso is not for sale." And here lies the heart of the matter. Retaliation may destroy buildings, but it cannot kill an idea whose time has come. And the idea is this: Africa does not belong to anyone else. Captain Traoré knows this better than most. He walks in the footsteps of Sankara, but he also walks alongside the farmers of Kaya, the students of Bobo Dioulasso, the mothers of Djibo. His strength is not in speeches or weapons, but in something far harder to break: belief. Belief that Burkina Faso has the right to make its own choices. Belief that dignity matters more than dollars. Belief that sovereignty is not a privilege, it is a birthright. And so the West trembles. Not because Traoré commands tanks, but because he commands hearts. Not because he rejects orders, but because his people echo that rejection, freely, loudly, and without fear. This is the power they cannot contain. The Burkina Faso army, once fractured, now stands with unity. Not because they are blind followers, but because they are awake. Because they know that behind every invitation lies expectation. Behind every handshake, a chain. And behind every threat, a test. And this test, Traoré has passed it. He did not fly to Washington. He did not beg for understanding. He did not flinch. And the people stood taller behind him, because they understood. This is not about one man, but about millions. That is why Burkina Faso President Ibrahim Traoré is no longer just a leader. He is a mirror, a reflection of what Africa can be when fear is cast aside. The United States expected a frightened man with an apologetic tone. Instead, they found a lion. And now they try to cage the roar with sanctions, with pressure, with narratives that twist courage into radicalism. But you cannot tame a generation that has nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. And across Africa, from the dusty alleys of Niamey to the schoolrooms of Addis Ababa, from the markets of Accra to the refugee camps in Chad, the echo is growing. If Burkina Faso can say no, so can we. Traoré's real weapon is not defiance, it is example. Because one example can break 1,000 illusions. And when the illusion fades, when people see that the emperor is not invincible, then the empire begins to fall. Not with gunshots, but with choices, with dignity, with unity, with voices raised not in fear, but in memory of what we once were, and in faith of what we can become again. Africa is not asking, Africa is remembering. Let us be clear, this is not the story of a diplomatic misunderstanding. It is the story of a test, of will, of courage, of sovereignty. And Burkina Faso passed it. The letter from Washington was never just paper. It was pressure. It was a leash, carefully hidden beneath polite language. But Traoré saw through it, and he did what few have dared to do. He tore it up. In doing so, he reminded the continent of something ancient. Freedom is not requested. It is seized. It is built. It is defended. Ibrahim Traoré Burkina Faso did not go to Washington to explain himself. He stayed with his people to protect them. That single act has become a beacon, not of rebellion, but of remembrance. Africa is not rising because of him. Africa is rising with him. And now, the world must decide. Will it continue to treat Africa like a playground of interests, or finally face a continent no longer willing to kneel? But the more important question is ours. What will we do with this moment? Will we let this fire fade, or will we carry it forward? If this story stirred something deep in your soul, don't keep it silent. Share it, speak it, subscribe, because no one else will tell the truth of Africa but us. In the comments, raise your voice. Africa rise. No more chains. We stand with Traoré. Dignity above aid. This is our time. This is more than politics. This is prophecy. From Ouagadougou to Bamako, from Niamey to Nairobi, the cry is the same. We will not be ruled. We will not be bought. We will not be broken. And let those who still dream of controlling us hear this clearly. The era of silence is over. The lion has roared, and the jungle has heard him.